Hello and welcome to the Lords of the Fallen review. I'd like to first address about this game that it obviously has a massive problem with crashing, and it does it a lot, whether it's due to a fiery explosion from an enemy dying to a gentle breeze in the wind. This game has a lot of crashing issues. I would like to, while addressing that, push it aside to show rather if this was fixed, would the game still be worth playing? Sadly, this seems to be a no. Really. No. The hit detection in this game is horrendously bad. None of the models even remotely match what they're doing, and they will hit you from exceedingly far distances despite what they actually do. To make this problem even worse, there's horrible hit detection both on them and on the player, but to the player, this is not a benefit. For the player, the hit detection is poorly done in the way that when you swing at an enemy, there is a possibility that you will go right through the enemy, do nothing, and you will only be open to be attacked yourself. So while that's swell and amazing, to the next topic at hand. The numbers in this game are completely convoluted and make absolutely no sense. There are types of ruins you can put on, which, as a sub-side note, ruins for the most part are pretty worthless. There's only like 2 decent ones, and after that, 1 good one. And then the rest are garbage to be inconvenient to you in every way. But back on topic, the numbers are completely convoluted. Whether you're putting them in your gauntlet or you're putting them on your weapon, they never seem to do anything that they state. For example, the power rune says that it does plus number, and then you put on your weapon. Does it do what the number says? Of course not. That's absurd. So when you put it on, it's trial and error, and you'll end up getting like plus 20 damage and plus 30, and it does nothing it states, and it makes no sense. Yay! Same can be put onto the gauntlet as I said before, where if you put on something like a lesser luck rune to a common rune, the number will be like 22 and then go to 24, but then when you look at the actual damage, it'll double in damage. But then of course, when you apply that to other areas, it'll all of a sudden do nothing of the sort, and it'll just be stupid and make no sense. And as I was talking about the gauntlet, let's bring out the magic system. The magic system is pretty dumb. It's supposed to allow you to change up the type of moves you can do on your gauntlet, but it doesn't seem to really do anything at all. At the end of the day, when you use the system, for the most part, if you use a normal type spell, it basically is your best equivalent to any type of rune. Because after that, the game does not allow you to get such high costs, high mana, that you can actually use these to an actual advantage. It becomes usually a one type of deal that doesn't actually help you all that much. Fire doesn't do very much damage, poison doesn't do very much damage, and the basic doesn't do very much damage. Some of them don't even seem to work correctly, as I've seen with the magic AoE effect, where it sometimes attacks the enemy and sometimes it stands around and acts like a disco ball. Who knows what's up with that, but it doesn't seem to function very well. Besides that, there's the actual spells you can learn with the class type you pick, and for the most part, they're pretty much as garbage as the other is. It applies way more damage in comparison, but they tend to be really stupid. For example, for the rogue, you have a move called Stab. The thing is, even while locked on, there's a possibility Stab will just swing at the air and hit nothing, or it'll just run off a cliff and kill itself. Because why not? I mean, if it's going to be worthless, it's got to go all the way. Besides that, everything else is pretty mediocre when it comes to that, requiring absurd amounts of spell points, which is pretty easy to come by. But by the time you get it, it's like, who cares? For the most part, you're going to be doing melee in this game. And the magic system is undoubtedly not very well thought out at all. But the last topic I want to come up with on this is the buffs. And the only one that seems to be really useful is the better as well be paladin, cleric one. And the only reason for that is it heals you when you use it. And the reason all the other buffs are pretty mediocre is that it takes about 5 seconds for you to actually get through the animation for the buff. And then the buff itself, irregardless of ranking, only lasts for about 10 seconds. And this is a patient game, so most enemies, unless they're just like cannon fodder anyway, which you wouldn't need the buff for, the bosses you have to wait for a very specific time in order to attack them. So every buff comes out just being just lazy and stupidly done. It's too short and it takes way too long to actually proc the effect. It's pointless. Once again, the only one that seems useful is the cleric one because of its utility, and that's it. Then going into the unbalanced system of this game sadly does not have a vast variety of weapons to use. You will either be using strength weapons or you will be using agility weapons. You can technically use faith weapons, but there's only one really good faith weapon, and it requires you to have 10 faith. So yeah, if you're even doing a combination of things, you already can get the best weapon without trying to go into it, and it doesn't scale. And every other faith weapon scales horribly. So really, there's only two types, strength and agility. I have to mention faith, but you can pretty much just get that immediately without doing anything or speccing into faith, so it's not a real build. But back on that, heavy two-handed weapons in the strength build are exceedingly amazing in comparison to agility, and there's multiple reasons. When you swing a weapon at any point in time, you are stun locked with that weapon. And here's the problem that makes agility pretty much garbage, and there's multiple things to it. For the first off part, for agility, you need to do 3 perfect swings in order to actually start doing damage. Which, it's not bad. It's just, you can do the same thing with a giant sword, one hit, and you can get out. You're less likely to be hurt with a giant two-handed sword than you are with the agility-based weapons. You can walk out of the way, you do way more damage, and it just generally scales better. If you put a luck rune, the rune that's probably the only one that's worth getting, you can go from like 40 damage from a weak great-handed weapon to like 300. It's absurd. And what's worse is on weapon damage, it scales on other things. So if you have a high weapon damage on your sword, you can do like 250 damage with a shield bash. But if you do it with agility weapon, you do mediocre damage because it's based off your weapon damage. So you're being punished for going agility. Not to mention, if you put it on an agility weapon, the best you're going to ever get, and I understand this to a point, but I don't, is that you will get like 40 plus damage. And I understand this because you get a damage boost from when you do your third strike. The thing is, if you do that from a strength point perspective, you're safer, not to mention strength gives you more equipment load, so you can wear heavier, bulkier armor. You're generally safer in every regard to using a giant weapon, which should be more penalized for being a heavy weapon, and it's not. You are penalized just horribly for using an agility weapon. You don't really get anything for doing it either. The only one that really requires a giant outlet of energy is agility weapons, which they do get, but they're being punished otherwise because they're the only ones that really need it, and then they're doing subpar damage. It makes no sense. So runes suck on them. You have to do a ton of hits, which leaves you open to attack. And don't think you can do the absurd and try to dodge in between attacks, because no, you are stun locked for the entire animation. So when it comes down to it, in the end, Some bosses are so absurd with their openings to be attacked that you essentially just walk in and poke the target and then you have to jump out. Which, in this case, if you were using a strength weapon, you would still be better off. You could do the same exact thing, but you'd probably do triple to quadruple damage. Just no sense. And it's even more disheartening because the game only has really two types of weapons, and you totally fucked up on one. So, yeah, that makes you look exceedingly bad. And as a side note, this game's kind of like Borderlands in a way with its weapons, where you get like one good type of weapon and then everything else is garbage. They're there, and there's plenty of options. They're just not worth using. Example of this would be the heavy axes. When you swing them, they tend to do more base damage than a great sword until like the end. But once you're done swinging, you're stunned for like 3 seconds. So they become completely unviable immediately. Most of the animations don't really help that cause either, because they come out really slow, and the game pretty much doesn't have a poise system until the end of the game for heavy armor only. Where if anyone touches you, you completely exaggerate and flip out and fly back a million miles. Of course, the enemies don't do this, of course, but you do. They can, but you have to be doing heavy attacks. And usually, the animations are so shoddily done, they'll just kind of like blatantly ignore the fact that they've been poise stunned. You'll probably notice that if you ever try the game. I wouldn't recommend it. There's also a side note too I want to mention on this, is that the game says there are weapons that are so heavy you can't lift them with one hand. And I've noticed all the weapons that seem to be really fucking heavy can be wielded with one hand. And what they meant to say is spears cannot be wielded with one hand. Even if the item only weighs like 2 pounds, your character will just be like, this is heavy, and they'll drop it. So obviously, instead of finishing animations for an item that's lighter than every other heavy weapon in existence, they decided it would be a lot easier to just tell you a bunch of bullshit and hand you an item that doesn't have a fully set weapon set. So that's good. That's good design. A little tad on story. There isn't really one. You're kind of just thrown in there as a guy who gets away from prison, and then you just have superpowers because you're not a good guy. And that's about it. You just go around and you kill stuff. There's not really much of a story. There's just miscellaneous things that are stupid. Enemies float on air for the most part in certain areas. Instead of like falling down through a platform that you would, they will just kind of float across it. Lots of stupid stuff like that. Mounts of bugs that don't involve the game exploding and crashing into a pile of total garbage. If you activate cutscenes out of order, they can prevent you from going into certain areas. Characters can disappear. Characters will, while you're fighting them, will just run away back to their spawn point and full heal. While they're attacking you, they might just disappear and then go back to their spawn point. This is kind of with bad hit detection. Enemies, this is two things. Enemies, they have really bad animations. So if you're fighting a boss and you're behind them and you're swinging and you think you're safe for a little bit, don't even think that's a possibility. Enemies will just 180 out of nowhere and will just start doing attacks instantly. There's cheap bullshit, like the final boss will light a flame wall underneath you, and once again with bad hit detection, it doesn't even need to be underneath you. And it does absurd amounts of damage. That's always fun. Enemies, while you're waiting for very specific attacks to actually have them be open to an attack. Usually they have a cheap move where it has really no animation, and they just kind of go, and usually it does more damage than their full combos. And it'll send you flying, and it's absurd. So at best, the game comes off as being cheap. It's not really hard, and if you really go into the route of strength, it actually becomes absurdly easy. And I didn't mention this, but the camera better as well not even exist. When it really comes down to it, it feels like they should have just put this into a different type of genre. Because they clearly don't know what they're doing. It's absurd how bad it is. When you go near anything, your camera will freak out. It flips out. It's absurd. You'd think out of one of the mechanics you'd want to have work properly, you'd think the camera would be it, but no. Not necessary. And as the last thing for miscellaneous, out of all the good things in the world, there's like 2 spellcasters in this game, and of course, their attacks can fly through walls. And no, it's not something that is supposed to be done. They just kind of fly through walls sometimes. So, yeah. Even at the end of the day, if this game fully functioned from its crashes, this game is so absurdly rushed that no, it's insulting to the player of how quickly and shoddily done this game was. As something I want to put in, I didn't mention graphics or sound, because that's not something I can really tell you. That's only something you can experience yourself. If you like the graphics, that's up to you. If you like the sound, that's up to you. Most of these other things, they're just facts. These are problems with the game. There's no point in talking about the graphics or sound. Because if I did, I would say the graphics look good. But that doesn't matter. Some people like these type of graphics, some don't. Some people like the sound, some don't. So who cares? Overall, the game is clearly rushed. They did a very botched job. There's multiple things wrong with it, and despite the fact the game is short, it doesn't really have much variety to it. Because even in the end, they actually resort to using the same models nearly immediately, probably like 2 hours in or something like that. They start reusing models. There's nothing different about them. They're just beefed up, and that's it. Really lazily done. All the bosses pretty much turn into the same type of character. You examine them, you see the one move, you wait for said move, you're done. Nothing interesting, they're not really hard. So overall, it's not a very good game. I think once they fix the crashes, if they do, it's been a decent bit. They seem to still have no progress on it. Probably average 5 out of 10. There's a sea of games that are better than it. I'd recommend playing those. For a $50 game, this isn't really worth it. It doesn't show any type of quality that really is astounding. At best, the gimmick of being able to press the button to properly reward you with some type of benefit is awesome. That's all it really did. Everything else is either mediocre or worse. There you go. Hopefully this review is informative. And hopefully this will help out people who decide to purchase this game in the future. So all of you have a good one. That was a review. See you later.